Good to see you again, Dave. You know, I've been doing these seminars on the custom bike fever, and I talk a little bit with people how custom bikes really started kind of after World War II, and like the Hells Angel bombing squad came back and the guys started stripping down bikes, basically making bobbers. So up through the 50s, we had two styles of custom bikes. We had the baggers with all the lights and everything going on, the real old style stuff, you know about that, and these bobber things. Well, as we got into the late 50s, we started getting drag racing bikes, and choppers came around, and you're one of the few guys I know that have been in the industry as long as I have. When I was racing, you were actually starting on custom bikes, so that was what, about the early 60s when you got started on this?
Well, about the mid-60s I started, and then, you know, I actually opened my first shop. Well, actually, I built my first shop in 1970, and that was like a little bigger than a one-car garage in my father's backyard, and half of it was a spray booth. Before that, I was in my father's lawnmower shed, which was about 4 by 10. And I used to have a little, one of those kitchen fans that you pull a cord, open the door. So when I was painting in there, you know, I could get rid of the paint fumes. But yeah, it's come a long way, and you know, it's been a long road.
Well, you know, we talk about 1958 exactly is when S&S came on the scene. George Smith was a drag racer at the time, and he was building some good parts, and people saw him winning on the track and asked him to start building. And I think this was the beginning of the performance modifications and big engines being combined with the style of the bikes. So, you know, running in the late 60s, we saw the choppers with Easy Rider and all that stuff, and then we saw this kind of combination of drag racing bikes, pro street styles. And I know you and Arlen did a lot of these low-slung little Sportsters. So tell us a little bit about the style bikes you were doing when you first got started in the 70s.
Well, the stuff that we first started doing, of course, we were working on Sportsters. Everybody had a Sportster back then. You know, in our area, you know, if you were riding a big twin, you know, you kind of were, you know, kind of on the outside. But anyways, you know, it started out with just do the usual, you know, clean up, paint, put a fat tire on the back, and you know, then it progressively got into cutting the frames, you know, raking the frames, maybe stretching the necks, and then it, you know, turned into welding hardtails on, and before you know it, you know, we've got long stretched out choppers with 20 over springers, and you know, that was a pretty cool deal. And we went that route not for really too long. I met Alan Ness in the early 70s, and from then on I kind of took his styling on for the East Coast, because there wasn't anybody on the East Coast that was really doing that kind of stuff. So you know, we started doing front sections and just making the bikes a lot longer and lower, but you know, very spindly looking, getting rid of everything we could, including the brakes. You know, we used to ride with just an old drum brake on the back. That was, you couldn't ask for anything more than that back then. There's no such thing as disc brakes. But, you know, that just evolved, and, you know, of course, they always say that all the trends start on the West Coast, and, you know, I'll have to admit, a lot of them do. But, you know, we were, you know, constantly trying to, you know, push that styling button, and you know, it's worked and it's evolved, and actually right now there's a lot of guys that are building these old bobbers that are not much different than what we were building in the 70s.
You know, you talk about the spindly front ends and the longer front ends. Actually, even Harley Davidson in 1971 noticed, watching what was going on in the aftermarket, and that's the year they came out with their first Night Train, or the Street Glide, you know, and it was really a big twin bike, and they put a Sportster front end on it and had foot pegs rather than floorboards, and kind of had this weird boat tail seat. Right now they're probably worth about $4 grand, $5 grand just for the seat. You can't get them, but back then everybody was just taking them off and throwing them away. Well, I know there was a couple different ways that people were going about extending the front ends during that period, and take these Sportsters, and we didn't really have a selection of fork tubes we have now, so there was slugs into the hydraulic front ends, and then on the springers you'd cut them apart and use some old Ford front end parts. So tell us a little bit about that ingenuity.
Well, I can remember when I extended the front end, the glide front end of my first bike, and you know, that was with the old 35mm forks. And like Bob says, you know, you didn't have a whole lot of choice on what you could buy at the time. And I can remember we used to go to the chopper shop, and you know, they would have slugs, and slugs were so dangerous. They were just an extension you screwed into your fork tube, and you know, there was a lot of them that bent over the next few years. But then they finally came out with fork tubes, so that kind of alleviated that. But like Bob was saying, the springers, you know, there wasn't much in the line of custom springers in the beginning. So if you wanted an extended springer, you took a Harley springer and you took an old Ford radius rod, and you could cut it and graft the radius rod into the fork to make it longer. But you know, those things are dangerous as hell, and they'd pogo around corners, and but you know, they sure look cool.
You know, it's things are a lot safer now. The choppers and Pro Streets we have coming out, and into the 80s, Pro Streets were definitely the bike of choice. And you have built quite a name with your Pro Street styling. It's a very sleek, clean style to it, and everybody knows Dave Perewitz with the flames and the nice, clean Pro Street look. So how did you take this? Now, you're not the only one that built Pro Streets, but you have a unique look. You can recognize a Perewitz Pro Street in a sea of bikes. Did that just come about naturally, or did you have a specific design or objectives when you go and build these Pro Street bikes?
Well, you know, up to this point, we don't do sketches. You know, when we build a bike, I pretty much know in my head just what it's going to look like. Getting back to the Pro Street style, you know, we used what we had, and then we modified it. If I didn't like the lines of something, we'd change it, rework it, and until we got a styling that I was real happy with. And you know, that kind of made it a little bit personalized, but I think for the most part it was always the paint. You know, our paint kind of stood out amongst most of the others, and between the styling niches that we did and the paint jobs, it wasn't too hard to decide that it was a Perewitz bike. But one thing I always loved is when I would build a new bike and people didn't know it was mine. You know, and they'd say, geez, this doesn't look like anything you built, you know. And so it was always cool to just, you know, go in a different area and still achieve the same thing.
Well, you know, styles have kind of changed now. In the past couple of years, or well, maybe 5-10 years ago, you'd go to a show and you'd see all Pro Streets, then you'd see all choppers. Then when bobbers became the craze, you'd see all bobbers. And while it was really nice to see how the different builders could differentiate this and really make a difference in those styles, there was style dominated or trend dominated at the shows. These days, there's a great diversity of what we're seeing in the shows, and like the Ultimate Builder Bike Show, you see tremendous, from stretched out Busas to recreated sport bikes, and with V-twin powered motors, and of course the traditional choppers. I know you've expanded quite a bit, Dave, on what you've been doing with bikes. Last time I was at your shop, I think you had a Busa in there. You've done some restorations, and you're not really known for that. So talk a little bit about the diversity in the marketplace and how that's good for the industry.
Well, my shop is basically a full-scale shop. We can do anything at all, and we have the equipment and the facility to, you know, to build anything we might want in any style. But you know, as the economy turned to shit, you know, all the $70,000 and $80,000 bikes we were building, and we were building a shitload of them, you know, that market kind of dried up. So I just basically moved around, and so instead of building $70,000 bikes, we're building $35,000 bikes, and it's all relative, you know, the amount of time in the $70,000 bike versus the 35. I probably made more money at the 35. But the styling is very diversified right now, between bobbers and baggers and you know, still some of that crazy long stuff. And like Bob says, we get into doing restorations. And you know, I never really realized how much work is involved in a restoration, and there's a lot. But you know, at this point, we do whatever it takes to pay the bills, and if it means, you know, doing restorations, we're doing it. And you know, it's all fun. You have to make it fun. And the bobbers, I really like building the bobbers. The kids, my kids are you know, quite an influence on me as to the styling. You know, at first, you know, they would tell me, you know, point me in a direction, and I'd say, no way, I can't do that. And then eventually I kind of let the reins loose, and you know, and I learned quickly that I do need that younger generation input.